This will easily be the most divisive album of the year, mark my words. Hi people and hello my Chili and Carnage crew, it's Chili here, the man who produces Iron for My Eyes, doing a 5-minute review on Linkin Park's newest album, From Zero. I think it's safe to assume that most of my fanbase knew Linkin Park from their early days, in particular, of course, their meteoric rise, starting from Hybrid Theory, and of course to the way that they reinvented themselves for Reanimation, and also their ability to break down barriers with their collaboration efforts with Jay-Z. So it was a huge loss to the metal community when Chester Bennington passed away 7 years ago, and yes, it's been that long, but despite the band calling it a day back then, you can't keep the musicians quiet. And so earlier this year, Linkin Park fans got the news that the band were not only back together, but were recording a new album with a new singer, and thus this starts a long fracture within the community that will be the focus of this episode along with the music. So let's talk about the singles first. The Emptiness Machine was the first single off the record, and I'll admit that I did not find this song particularly interesting when I heard it a few months ago. But for whichever reason, upon my most recent playthrough, I must admit that I have warmed up to this track, and I can see in YouTube comment sections as well that many fans agree this is a strong tune from them, and yes, I do agree with that statement. As for the following song, Heavy as the Crown, this is not a bad song, but does feel rather blasé. It does retain, of course, a fair few similarities to the first single mentioned before, and if I'm being honest, it's hard to tell them apart at certain sections. When the single was released, my interest was kind of waning for the new record, but nowhere near as much as Over Each Other would when it was dropped. This is the ballad, I guess, of the album, and it just plain sucks. Maybe it's more similar to the recent Linkin Park music, but I gave up listening to their records after Minutes to Midnight, so I can't draw this comparison definitively. Either way, I did not like this tune, and that last soundbite stating that they got it sounded so bored, like they were half asleep and just woke up. Now I can't blame the band for deciding to continue on in writing music and performing. After all, this is the nature of the music industry. It has happened before and it will continue to happen. So if you are feeling like the band are committing a treasonous act, then please note it's up to them ultimately. But the choice in singer with Emily Armstrong has been a very intriguing choice to say the least. And this boils down to the singer being fairly unknown and also her ties to Scientology. She was certainly in the public crosshairs when she publicly defended Danny Masterton after he received a 30-year sentence for his crimes, but regardless, I think that we have to give her a chance. Now, when a band chooses to replace their lead singer, they have to decide on one of two options. Either they want a singer that can mimic the range of the original vocalist, and this is quite the tall order considering Chester's range, or they want to change it up altogether with a new style. And with Emily's inclusion, it's almost like the band created a third option by trying to appease both of these at once. Admittedly, my first impressions of Emily weren't spectacular, with her first live performance with Linkin Park being met with Linkin Park having a few flaws, but you could kind of chalk this one up to nerves in the new role. It's one thing to practice in a private booth with the band, but another to be on a stage watched by thousands of fans. You know, the biggest issue I faced when this album was released was whether or not that I could separate Chester Bennington's era of Linkin Park to this new era here, and it's going to be the first hurdle any old school fans must overcome when listening to this album. Outside of the singles, there are still a few decent tracks on hand, such as Two-Faced, which does call back to that Hybrid Theory era of shouty vocals delivery, and of course scratchy samples over some really heavy riffs. I must admit, I really enjoyed this tune. Even the track IGYEIH, or I Gave You Everything I Had, was another solid tune that, amongst the mix, also delivers a powerful punch by Emily Armstrong, and showcases just why she was chosen for her role in the band. Now, like I said before, the music industry doesn't grow moss on it, and musicians will always play their music and also be replaced. Now, with Linkin Park's case, it's almost like our modern day equivalent of Alice in Chains deciding to proceed without Lane Staley. Just like Lane, Chester had a highly impressive and powerful vocal range. He was iconic for his time, and his premature death left us with a massive void in our world. And yet, Alice in Chains have marched forward with their new singer and released some amazing songs and albums out of it. Of course, this would be paled in comparison to their original works, and with Linkin Park it's no different, but alas, this is still early days for the band. Another comparison I want to make is between Slipknot and Linkin Park, and this is mostly for those who are still hung up on the fact that the band has continued without Chester Bennington. So in the case of Slipknot, the band have made it abundantly clear that they will continue the band despite any lineup changes that may occur, and they have made this very clear with the numerous lineup changes that have occurred. But this does complicate things with lead singer Corey Taylor. Could you imagine replacing him in the band's lineup? Regardless of your opinion, they one day will do so. And this is the parallel that I want to make, because like Chester Bennington, Corey Taylor was a replacement for the original singer of the band. But admittedly, the pair of singers of course made their band famous for who they are now and refined their sound. So doing so would be a huge task to undertake. One of the biggest issues I saw surrounding this album outside of the singer controversy was the amount of songwriters that are included on this album. Out of the 11 tracks, well 10 technically as the first is a short intro piece, 7 of the tracks have additional writers, with almost none of them being retained between songs. This makes for a complicated mess, as the old saying goes, too many chefs can spoil the broth. Is this meant to be a collaboration effort or a Linkin Park record? With each new songwriter added to the process, we end up with a lot of tracks that sound vastly different to one another. For example, the track Overflow is a very quiet piece that feels like an Imagine Dragons polished turd, and is such an out of place song with its placement right after the raw and almost punk sounding song Casualty. Then we have the song Stained, which also tries to shift the band into that new pop territory with some great beats, but it feels so disingenuous. On the other hand, there are songs written by Linkin Park that are of course much better and concise, and one of the songs was the aforementioned track Casualty. I think that track was very different for what the band had done before, and I must admit that while it caught me by surprise, it was really good to hear, especially those shouty lyrics. I think if the band has any hope of moving forward in this new direction, they need to abandon any additional writers when recording an album, and need to write their new album as the band Linkin Park, with no outside contribution. Now this brings me to my final point, and that is that should Linkin Park have continued using the band's name or not moving forward? Well, this is a very complex question, as the band are clearly playing to their style of music, but they wouldn't have chosen Emily if they didn't want to change their style as well. So I guess the obvious answer why they didn't was purely for marketing. It's easier to keep the name to retain the followers, and clearly this has worked with the millions of views and plays that each of the singles have received. Maybe it would have been adequate to rebrand them as Linkin Park Hybrid Theory or something like that to reflect their change, but that's a bit of a mouthful really. No, the name really doesn't bother me in the end. It's the music, and for most of the part, it's not bad, but it took a while to warm up to. I thought the lead singles were less than impressive, of course, upon my first hearing, and as I've mentioned before, I was very apprehensive in their new venture. But now I feel that the band are writing music that, for the first time in several records, I have enjoyed by the musicians, as the last few records did nothing for me. Although I must mention, I think this is a fairly middle-of-the-road effort that tries to appease all fans at once, when the band have had different styles over their tenure, and thus it really doesn't land any significant singles. Solid, but not mind-blowing. Overall, I'm going to give this album a score of 6.5 million chilies on the spicy scale, with my favourite tracks being The Emptiness Machine, Casualty, and Two-Faced. For an album that's only 30 minutes long, it does suffer from an identity crisis and lacks any clear direction which path the band want to walk down. Maybe the first step was overcoming any negative backlash from the community, but I think that moving forward, the band should acknowledge that they have let Bandora out of the box, and it doesn't matter which direction they take now, because they will be pissing off any old school fans that they may have had, regardless of which path they are going to walk down. For now, I'll consider this as baby steps towards this new era, but I'm intrigued with what you have to say about the band, so comment below. If you've enjoyed this content, make sure to smash that like button, subscribe to us, and stay notified for future music related content, because it keeps our manager happy at the end of the day. We are also on Discord, Instagram, Facebook, and all those other social platforms if you want to check us out. As always, people, you have a great day and stay spicy.